Hello everyone, and thank you for listening to this recording of my presentation. My name is Filip Bečanović. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Belgrade School of Electrical Engineering and at the University of Paris-Créteil. This work was done at the LACNRS in Toulouse, France in the spring of 2022. Both me and my co-author Jared Miller from Northeastern University in Boston spent time as guest PhD students in the Geppetto Robotics and Brain POP team respectively. This work was supervised by Professor Vincent Bonnet from the Geppetto team and by my PhD co-mentors Professor Jovanovic and Professor Mohammed. The presentation will be loosely divided into 4 parts. First, I will give some background, then I will attempt to describe the problem and what it is that we did to solve it, and finishing off with conclusions and takeaways. My background is in human motion analysis with collaborative robotics, so I will introduce 2 motivating examples from the field. Since the mid-80s, researchers have attempted to model human motion planning as an optimization problem. A moderately simple example could be box lifting motion, which involves the whole body, external forces, and collision avoidance. Also stability. It has been shown that optimization-based motion planning is able to produce realistic-looking motion that fits human data well. The degree of accuracy varies across studies and the cost function used. The same can be said about the force sharing problem, where you need to distribute the muscle forces in the lower limbs during gait, such that it fits the data from a human well, and multiple cost functions have been proposed like muscle activation or muscle power. But the question is, which cost function gives the best accuracy? The field that gives the answer to this problem is called inverse optimization, and traditionally, it aims at finding the cost function when given an optimal solution in the feasible set. Another subfield could be called constrained discovery, aims to find the feasible set when given the cost function and the solution of the problem. So, in order to search the function space, we have to parameterize with a finite amount of variables, and we will form an approximation f alpha of x that will be the weighted sum of basis functions that are chosen to be convex and continuously differentiable. And this basis will be at the center of our study. So the question we can ask ourselves is if the measurement y, given measurement y of human motion, can be made to be optimal with respect to this cost function by some choice of alphas. And this is the problem 1 called feasibility. Oftentimes we cannot find alphas such that y is optimal, and therefore we have to resort to the approximate distance problem, called problem number 2 here, where we have to minimize the distance between the measurements y and the possible solution of our optimization problem x, and we perform the search over both x and the parameters alpha. And this is a bi-level problem, and it's non-convex, very difficult to solve, and computationally intensive. And so, when we want to test whether a basis is not good enough, we have to usually run global optimization on the non-convex bi-level distance problem, only to find out that our basis is not well chosen and that we cannot achieve the desired accuracy. Instead, what we propose here as option 2 is to find a lower bound on the distance using a convex semi-definite program. This would allow for a fast invalidation of a basis set. And so, how do we do this? Let me show you what an unconstrained set of global optimizers looks like. So what does the parametric optimizers when we vary the alpha look like? So we will, in the unconstrained case, suppose that basis functions are strongly convex in order to facilitate the analysis. And let us define a ground set which contains our decision variables x and our parameters alpha. So the set of global optima g hat will contain optimal x's and alphas corresponding to these optimal x's. These pairs are unique. I mean, each x is unique because the functions are strongly convex. The set of global optima in the proper sense g is the projection on the x-coordinate of g hat. To formulate the minimum distance projection problem of our measurements, we formulate it as a search over the set g hat of x and alpha, such that the x is in optimal given alpha, but at the minimum distance away from y. Note also that we can represent the set g hat as a map, kappa, that maps alphas into x's. these two representations are equivalent. So a set of global optimizers looks like the green shape that you see on the screen. Here we have 5 basis functions with 3-dimensional decision variables, and the shape of this set depends on the shape of each function, which depends on the Hessian of the function, and so also on the location of the individual minima of these functions. So when we vary this, we vary the shape of the set. When we add another function, we kind of add a part of the some part of the set that goes towards this minimum. And so we need to choose a good basis functions that encompass our data set in some sense. Usually in high dimensional spaces, this is very difficult to visualize, and the measurements often lie outside of this set. So when we project them onto the set, usually we end up with some point that's on the boundary. It is just so the case that the points on the boundary of this set correspond to parametrizations where some of the parameters alpha are set to 0. So oftentimes we will find sparse solutions. This is kind of interesting. So what does this look like in the constraint case? We lift off the strongly convex assumption. We assume a compact feasible set that's described by linear equalities and convex inequalities, and we assume that Slater's condition holds, which allows us to say that the KKT conditions are necessary and sufficient for the optimality of a particular decision vector. So what does this mean? The KKT conditions, we add some Lagrangian multipliers lambda and mu such that the stationarity condition, which is the first one here, is satisfied, the primal and dual feasibility are satisfied, and the complementary slackness is satisfied. So what do we have here? We have here an extended constrained ground set W superscript C that now contains decision variables, parameters of the cost function, and Lagrangian multipliers. We then describe G hat superscript C, which is the set of constrained global optima, and G superscript C, which is the projection onto the x coordinate of G hat. And so how do we formulate the projection problem now in the constraint case? We say we perform a search over the decision variables, cost function parameters, and Lagrangian multipliers such that the decision variable is the closest to the measured trajectory, but that also is an optimum of our optimization problem. Please note that now the constrained global optima set G hat superscript C is equivalent to a mapping representation kappa C that is now a vector mapping, because for each parameter value alpha there may be multiple x's that satisfy the KKT conditions. And so this becomes a bit more difficult. Here we have an example with 2-dimensional decision variables and 3 cost function in our basis. You can see the unconstrained global optima set in green and the constrained global optima set in black. As you can see, the constrained global optima set inside of the red rectangle, you can definitely see that it is not a subset of the constrained global optima set. And as you can see, it is not very smooth. So when we project onto this set, it's going to be all the more difficult. So how does this projection actually work? So usually, because the projection is a non-convex bilevel problem, we have to perform local search. When we have quadratic cost functions, this is a bit more easy because we can express analytically in terms of alphas the optimal value of the solution of the problem. And as you can see, for unconstrained quadratic direct models, we have an unconstrained search with the cost function shown here, f of alpha. In the constrained forward model case, we have a more discontinuous search because there may be multiple solutions for the direct problem given a parametrization alpha. So first we have to solve the optimization problem for a given alpha, and then look if there is multiplicity of solutions by monitoring the null space of the meshed matrix sum alpha j qj. And then we have to search for the minimum distance within this set. However, as we minimize this cost function, we will get to a local minimum. What we propose is to use an idea from polynomial optimization called semi-definite relaxation. Our decision variable being from the ground set and being a concatenation of x and alpha, we lift this into matrix space and get a positive semi-definite matrix of rank 1. All the expressions from the projection problem can be expressed in terms of this matrix, and the bilinear equality constraints that are a consequence of the gradient equals 0 constraint become linear in the matrix. This allows us to solve a linear problem in matrix space, which is pretty much a convex problem and is much easier to solve. We add some additional valid inequalities that should hold for the rank 1 matrix. But what's the catch is that we lift the rank 1 constraint on the matrix, and thus this is a relaxation. So we will get only a lower bound on the original problem, but this is exactly what we want. In the constraint case, the algebra is a bit more difficult as the ground set now contains Lagrangian multipliers, but we only need to include the Lagrangian multipliers of the inequality within the moment matrix, because the Lagrangian multipliers of equalities that I dubbed lambda here do not enter any bilinear equality constraints, and thus no need to include them in the matrix. Again, we express all the KKT conditions with the moment matrix and add additional valid inequalities for Lagrangian multipliers that are now inside of the moment matrix. And so what does a projection look like? Here we see an example with two-dimensional decision variables and the basis of 5 cost functions. The optimal set is given in green. The projection by local search is given as a pink cross. The projection with our relaxed projection with a linear matrix inequality, or also called the semi-definite program, is given as a purple cross. And as a reference, we put the what was regarded as a standard method of inverse optimization in the literature, the inverse KKT projection, which does not give good results in this example. So as you can see, the purple cross is actually at a lower distance, is outside of the set because we relaxed the rank 1 constraint on the matrix, and thus we obtain the lower bound on the distance. The same goes for this projection onto the constraint set in a 3-dimensional case with 3 cost functions. And as you can see, the pink plus is the local search, the purple cross is again our LMI/SDP, and also the silver square given by the inverse KKT projection that we dubbed also Keshavara's is not giving quite good results here. So this is more or less what we propose to do, is to solve this LMI and to find a lower bound that's more or less tight on the distance that we can achieve with a particular basis. And if this distance surpasses our error expectations or desires, then we can note that we have to revise the set of basis functions and add some more, or subtract some and add other ones. We can extend this framework to pointwise maximum representable functions. So if our functions from the basis can be represented as pointwise maximum of some set of convex functions, then we can use also a technique called lifting into constrained problem space and transform these cost functions into constrained optimization problems, and thus we can also include these kinds of cost functions within the basis. We also believe that we could extend this to projection onto local minima and allow non-convex cost functions and non-convex constraints. So, however, this would require a much higher level of analysis and algebra, as the sets of local minima can be discontinuous and disconnected. And also the KKT conditions of first order are no longer sufficient, and we have to impose constraints algebraic on the Hessians in the unconstrained case that it's positive definite, and in the constrained case that it forms a positive form over the critical cone. So what are the takeaways from this presentation and this work? Is that inverse optimization is in some sense a projection onto the set of global optima, parametric global optima of some cost functions, that you can solve it locally by using some local search. You can also find lower bounds by using LMIs and also SDPs, whatever you want to call it. And also you can add some max-representable discontinuous cost functions inside of your bases. What should be done in the future? Additional continuity properties of the set of global optima should be analyzed. We should probably look into analytic properties of Pareto sets in multi-objective optimization. We could also tighten these lower bounds by using polynomial optimization and moment matrices of higher order. We could project onto local minima, and this is definitely a thing to look into. And another thing we think would be very good is to discover candidate cost functions that would reduce the error over the whole data set and that are, let's say, interpretable. So with this, I want to end with I want to thank the Geppetto group at LAS. I want to thank the Brain POP group at LAS, also Professor Didier Henrion and Victor Magnon. And I want to thank everyone that has funded this research. And thank you all for listening. Thank you for your attention, and check the GitHub link if you want to see the code. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me.